Hey, what's up, bookworms and constant readers? We are starting a new series today called A Stephen King Palaver, where we are going to be talking about just the works of Stephen King and how he has influenced our lives, our favorites, all that kind of stuff that us constant readers can talk about. And my first guest this episode is Sarah from Sarah Reads, someone who just kind of really just got introduced to on a personal level and just found out that we're both just humongous Stephen King fans. And we talked together on Philip Chase's channel recently about Dark Tower, and we said, you know what, we're going to get like a one-on-one so we can talk some more Stephen King stuff outside of the path of being. So Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. This is exciting.
I'm excited as hell because, it just seems like for the longest time on BookTube, I haven't been able to find a lot of people that are into Stephen King as much as I am. So when I do find one, I want to make sure that I actually pick their brain and see if they're as obsessed as I am.
Hopefully I will live up to the expectations.
Right. So you've covered Stephen King on your channel a little bit. What would you say some of the series or some of the books that you've talked about that you've enjoyed talking about the most on there?
Yeah, so I haven't had the opportunity to talk about as much as I would have liked. I'm still pretty new to BookTube. It's been about like 3 or 4 months, I think, since I started up my channel. I've talked a fair bit about The Dark Tower, and I was so happy to be invited on by Philip Chase. That was a great conversation that we had about the first 3 books in the series. And I've tried to sprinkle in some of his books to kind of catch people unawares, people who come for like the mainstream fantasy. I try to throw some of his books into those recommendation lists so that I can try to turn new people on to reading to him, or remind people that he does in fact write fantasy and that he does in fact write books that are worthy of being up there with all those other ones that we talk about a lot on BookTube. So I've kind of randomly thrown some of his books, some of his shorter books in there. But what I talk about the most, I'm sure, is The Dark Tower, because that's the series that kind of captured my heart when it came to Stephen King.
Right. So I guess that's the good first question I got here is, how did you discover Mr. Stephen King? What was your first introduction to him?
So it's kind of a funny story. So the first time I ever heard of Stephen King, I was a little girl. So when I have always really liked to read, and I have always really liked to write. And so when I was little, I spent a lot of time like writing short stories, writing things at home, and just getting my parents to read them. And I remember, this is an embarrassing story. I remember I wrote a Halloween story in primary school, and when they give you like that cutout, it looks like a pumpkin, and there's like lines on the bottom and you have to fill it in. So I wrote a story for that, and there were monsters and they came and everybody ended up dying. So my teacher called my parents and was like, maybe you should talk to Sarah. Like, she wrote this story and all these monsters came and killed people. And so I came home and my dad was kind of like, so your story? I was like, yeah, it was great. And he was like, so everybody died? And I was like, well, that's what happens when monsters come, Dad. And he was like, fair enough. He was like, you must be a little Stephen King in the making. I was like, who's that? But obviously I was too young to really read it. And so that kind of introduced me to who he was. And my dad had kind of described him as someone who had things that were realistic happen. So, monsters come and people do get hurt or people do die. And so when I was a little bit older, I was around 12, which I mentioned in the Dark Tower video as well.
That's
my dad and I have always
like, I can't imagine reading Dark Tower at 12. Jesus Christ.
My dad and I had always like passed books back and forth. So the first fantasy book we read was The Hobbit. I was only 5, so I was still too young to read Lord of the Rings. I read that when I was 10, read a lot of Shannara, read like a lot of kind of intro level fantasy that I would read and he would reread at the same time so we could talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I guess when I was 12, probably going into 13, so like kind of entering into the teenage years, I read The Talisman, which was my first Stephen King novel. So I guess technically not just Stephen King because it's Peter Straub as well. And I loved it. I know you didn't have the same reaction when you read it.
I think if I had read that at that age, I probably would have been way more into it.
Right, because it is most definitely a coming of age story, and I really loved it, and I loved the concepts that he explored in there without giving too much away, like the alternate universes and how things that we do impact other worlds. And so then when I loved that so much, my dad said, well, if you really like that, then you should read this series. And I started The Dark Tower. And it was around when I was that age, that's around when book 4 was coming out. And so I was able to read books 1 through 4 all in a row. And then we had the big wait for book 5 and kind of got into The Waiting Game. And my dad was never really into the horror aspect of Stephen King, but my uncle really was. And I think it was through my uncle that my dad discovered The Dark Tower, because my uncle's a huge Stephen King fan. And so he had kind of said, well, this is Stephen King, but it's really Western / fantasy. So he picked that up and became a big Dark Tower fan as well, but never really branched out to the rest of Stephen King.
That's just wild to me when I hear that people were Stephen King fans, but not for horror, especially during that time period. But yeah, I think we read them at the same time, but obviously we were different ages, because I read everything that my high school library had. They didn't have Dark Tower. And I was in his book club, and they're like, hey, we're going to be sending out Wizard and Glass here pretty soon. I'm like, oh, well. So I went and found like the paperbacks and read 1, 2, and 3 in a row, and then became like freaking obsessed with it. But yeah, 12 years old. No, I didn't. I think I was like about 15 when I first started reading Stephen King. But I started with this big boy right here. I started with it, just like a lot of people that saw that TV miniseries that came out at the time. That's what kind of opened my mind to it. But hell, even at 15, I was scared. So I can't even imagine at 12. Yeah. So that's really, 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 really wild there. So I do want to say, guys, that this is not spoilers or anything like that.
No.
We'll talk about maybe some characters and some things that we really like, but we're not going to like blow the ending of The Dark Tower for you or anything like that. I'll let you experience that disappointment on your own. And I'm sure that topic will come up more than once, but I guess the best way to do this is, if gun to your head, Roland's gun pointing at your head, you got to pick a favorite Stephen King book. What you picking?
Such a hard question. Such a hard question. I can't even really pick my favorite Dark Tower book. I talk about this on my channel a lot. I find it so hard. It changes depending on what I'm reading and when I'm reading it. So Dark Tower in general, I would say, is my favorite work by Stephen King. If we take that series as a whole, that is my favorite thing that he has done that I have read so far. Within Dark Tower, it's really a toss-up. I love The Gunslinger. I said this on Philip's channel as well. If The Gunslinger was a standalone book, it would still be one of my favorite books of all time, easily. I love it. But I also really love The Drawing of the Three. I love Wizard and Glass. So I love all of those. Outside of The Dark Tower, his memoir on writing, love it. I've read it like 5 times. I think that it's excellent. It showcases, I think, the kind of writer that he is, but also his approach to life and the fact that he doesn't take himself too seriously, and he can acknowledge the contribution that he's made. And I think you can see how he deals so well with his detractors because of the kind of personality that he's had. And I just like reading about the things that he's overcome and how that has influenced his writing, and I know that we've talked about this before, but very few writers capture that full scope, that realistic aspect of life and all of its really dark parts as well as he does. And I think that when you read on writing, you can get an appreciation for how he is able to do that.
That's a great answer. I've never heard anybody say that. But what I think that is great about On Writing is I tell this to people, like, even if you aren't Stephen King fans, if you just have an interest in becoming a writer, I feel like you can really learn some stuff from that book, because I read it and I was like, I have no ambition to be a writer, but kind of interested in it after reading that. So yeah, that's a great pick. I would have never thought. He
does a good sell. I mean, and novel wise, if we're talking fiction, The Stand is fantastic. I love The Stand. Who doesn't love The Stand? I mean,
I always say it, but I was like, I'm not going to fight anybody if they say The Stand. I mean, obviously, right? Stand is just an amazing feat, because he has like 30 main characters in it, and you love all of them. You are interested in every single character. It's amazing. I never read a story that had that. This is before I was reading a lot of epic fantasy, that have like 200 characters. But at the time, that was a lot of characters, and the fact that he was able to differentiate all of them and give each of them like their own kind of little arc in that story, which we say little, because I mean that's a big old book. But the fact that the good and the bad, you loved or loved to hate every character in that book. There was no throwaways in it. And I think that's just an amazing feat. So definitely The Stand is just wonderful. I would like to revisit that if I didn't, if I had an extra 4 months to spare.
Have you read both of them? I've only ever read the full edition. I've never read.
No, I've only read. That's the funny thing about it is I said I read every single book that he had released at the time when I was a freshman in high school, except for Dark Tower and The Stand. I had and Eyes of the Dragon. They didn't have Eyes of the Dragon either. I just read that for the first time last year, and It's good. But anyway, with The Stand, it was intimidating. I was like, I read it this summer, and that took me like the whole summer. It was 15, I wouldn't read the level I did now. And the fact that I had to hide Stephen King books from my mom because very religious upbringing, and she was told by a friend at work that Stephen King was the devil, so couldn't have any of that. Couldn't have any rock albums in my house, so I was just like, I'm not going to do that with another book. I'm just trying to hide it it'll take me a year or two to read that. So I kind of skipped it. I read it for the first time in 2017, actually. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. It's just as good as everybody said it was. Who knew? So yeah, everybody's got a little.
And you're right. The characters in that are so distinct. Because now that we have read a lot of epic fantasy, there's some authors who still do that really well, like George R.R. Martin. His huge cast of characters, very distinct from each other. But there are lots of epic fantasy, like there are lots of books that I read where you could interchange some people and they probably wouldn't feel too different. But I do, in The Stand, they all feel very distinct, very complete as characters. And I think that he deserves credit for how well he does that.
Well, speaking of characters, and this is what we both think that King does better than just about everyone, is he makes his characters feel so real. So you got to pick a favorite character. Now, I think this one might be a little tougher because I have an answer that I usually go to, but it does always kind of change because I'll think of one that like I can relate to on a personal level, like a Ben Hanscom from It, the fat kid who got skinny and all of a sudden his life, kind of changed because I was a fat kid in junior high. So I always kind of related to that. But there are other characters that I say I admire more. But I'm curious about what yours is. Do you have an answer?
It's going to be a really boring answer. I'm sure it's Roland. I can't love the Dark Tower as much as I do and not feel like he is my favorite character.
I always hear people mention their favorite Dark Tower characters and no one ever mentions Roland. So it's like, yeah, come on.
I do. Roland is my favorite character to think about. I spend a lot of time, even when I'm not even reading Dark Tower, just thinking about Roland and about what happens along his journey within those books. I'm a big Western fan as well. I grew up, and I think this is what was part of the appeal when I started Dark Tower. My dad and I also used to watch a lot of Westerns together. And he starts off like in that first book as that iconic character that you see in so many Westerns. Now, when I say I liked them, I liked watching them. I haven't read a whole lot of them. And it was he was such a larger than life character, and watching him change and develop and grow over the course of the series was so interesting. And it's hard not to fall in love with a character when you get to follow them for so long. Like I love a lot of Stephen King's characters, but we get to spend so much time with the quartet that we get to see them over a longer period of time. And I think that just reinforces that attachment. Like I said, it's probably a boring answer from someone who already said she loves the Dark Tower.
Everyone always names one of his villains, honestly. They always want to go to the villains because, I mean, let's be honest, he writes some great villains. But
he does.
No, that's a spectacular. And I think, the fact that that's his only real series of books is that, and I guess now Bill Hodges, you'd kind of count that. But I'm not putting Holly Gibney up there with Roland yet, But I think that with Roland is because you see he's a very different character in book 1 than he is in book 7. That's even before you get that 600-page flashback, and find out even more about his life that you've been waiting for forever. So no, I think that's a great answer. I thought you were going to say Jake.
I do love Jake. And Jake, when I was a teenager, Jake would have been my favorite for sure. And that's what I said in Philip's video as well, as I read those books, or most of them, when I was around Jake's age. Well, a little bit older than Jake, but Jake seems a little bit older than 11, to be fair. So I felt that kinship when I read it, and then I could identify with him, I think, when I was reading them. And I still think he's a great character. And you say this all the time on your channel, and I think this is probably one of the very first videos I watched by you, is a Stephen King video, and you said certain things, and I was like, I have to subscribe to this person. I agree with all of these things. And I had only just come to BookTube, but he writes the coming of age story like nobody else. His kids feel like kids, and I think we do a lot of erasure when we look back at our own lives and we look at who we were and how we acted and what we thought and what we felt. We ascribe the values and the beliefs that we have now onto the people that we were then. And through some miracle, I feel like Stephen King is able to separate that. He is able to write those kids the way that kids are.
That is absolutely true. And he still continues at this age to be able to do it. Because then later I was just like, how does he keep doing this? I was like, the guy was a kid 65 years ago. How does he still know how to do this? But all these other authors that try to do it, they don't understand how kids talk. I feel like Stephen King and Joss Whedon were like the only people who understood how kids talked. And that's just like such a thing. It would just kind of take you out of it. Like you watch like, all right, I'm going to kind of date myself here. I admittedly watched Dawson's Creek, and I watched Dawson's Creek. And at the time I was like, we never talked like this as teenagers. And that was always something that, like, looking back on, I'm like, how did I watch that show? It's so cringe hearing these kids talk like that. But you read something like Later or Revival or It, and you hear all these kids talk to you, like, that is just magnificent. How does he continue to do this? But yeah, that's why I expected to like The Talisman more than I did. And I had no problems with Jack in that. I just didn't like Richard. Okay, so there we go. You hear about this theory that people think that Jake and Jack are the same person in different universes? That's a weird one. I never heard that one until recently. Have you ever heard that?
That is strange. I have not read that. No, I have not heard that.
I think you guys just confused because the names were similar. But anyway,
he likes the J names. Even in Later, the main character's name is Jamie, and I think I was like calling him Jake to my husband as I was talking. I was like, no, his name's not Jake. What is it? It's Jamie.
All right, now here's where we get like a little deeper with this. And a lot of people think that this kind of question is hokey. To me, it means a lot, because there is no author who has been in my head more in my lifetime, obviously, than Stephen King. So when I say that his works have profoundly influenced my life, I don't mean it as hyperbole. I sincerely mean it. So what would you say? How would you say that his works, because I saw your yearbook quote, and that is strong, by the way. How would you say his works have influenced your life?
I think that Stephen King has had a huge impact on me, and The Dark Tower specifically has had a huge impact on my life. If we just start in terms of the kind of books that I like to read, when I was reading The Dark Tower, I hadn't read as much as I have now, but I read a fair bit of fantasy from like throughout my whole life. And what he did and what I was reading, I felt like no one else had ever done. And even now, so that is, I read those books like 20 odd years ago, and for the first time. And I still think that what he has done with The Dark Tower has not been replicated. There's lots of people now, or there are some people who are writing weird fantasy, and you definitely get a lot of that genre blending now, and that's great. It's good to have a variety out there, but I still think that it's something really unique, and it really shaped the way that I approached fiction. I wanted to read things that were boundary pushing in that way. I wanted to see people experiment. I wanted to know that people were kind of stretching themselves to the limit and to the best of what they could do. And when I read more Stephen King and I was able to experience more of his works, I really, and we can talk about this later too, but I have a fondness for the way that he ends books. He has made me into someone who likes the open ending that people seem to hate in so many of his books. And I don't know if that comes from him. I don't know if it's because I read so much of his stuff at a formative age. But when people say that they like Stephen King, they hate his endings, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like,
I've ranted numerous times in my multiverse videos by everybody saying, oh, his endings always sucks. I was like, look, there's some endings where I've been kind of scratching my head and been like, really, that's what you went with? But every ending sucks. You're trying too hard now. And this is just the only reason that this has ever happened is because he said he did not like The Shining that Stanley Kubrick did, because it changed his book too much. And it just turned into Stephen King hates this movie. It's better than his book. And I'm like, well, first, no, it's not. But it is a very good movie. But, it just seems like that's just like a myth that's become now. Like, all of his endings suck, and he hated The Shining. That's like all the people know. And he wrote that one scene in it. That's like what people who don't read him think about it. And something that you mentioned in that video of Philip that I really appreciated is so many people think that he's just a schlock writer, that he's not a good writer, that he's just a pop culture meme, basically, in writing form. And I'm like, no, guys, that's Dean Koontz. Stephen King can actually write.
Yes. Yeah, he definitely can. And I think he's very purposeful about what he puts in his books. And you mentioned Buffy and I see a lot of similarities between Stephen King and Joss Whedon. I'm also a huge Buffy fan. I feel like he also integrates pop culture into his books and the things that he likes into his books in a way that doesn't make them feel dated. I watch Buffy all the time. I rewatch it, and I don't ever feel like, yes, I can tell that I'm watching something that started in the 90s, but I don't ever feel like I have moved on from it. Like, I don't feel like it's fallen behind, or it's not worth watching. And I feel the same way about Stephen King's novels. Like when you read The Dark Tower, and this is not a spoiler, you will find references to Watership Down, and you will find, you know, Beatles songs. You will find the things that clearly Stephen King loved as a kid, adolescent, young adult interspersed in there, but he builds it into this kind of quasi post-apocalyptic world in a way that makes it feel like it doesn't matter if you read this book in 2075, it's still going to be relevant in the same way. And I really like that he does that. I like that he doesn't shy away from those like lowbrow, we'll say, interests, and he just kind of fully embraces it. I think that works really well. And I think this is part of what appealed me to him as a kid, is like those things that he put in were some of the things that I really loved. Like Watership Down is one of my favorite books of all time. So when I saw all those references when I was first reading them, it's like, oh wow, Watership Down is the first kind of adult book that I read on my own. And there are the obvious Richard Adams references in The Wastelands, but he also uses words in The Dark Tower, like Silflay, which means go up and eat grass, that are from Watership Down. They don't exist. They're not real words. But unless you read Watership Down and loved it, and read Gunslinger and loved it, you probably wouldn't even know that the reference was there. And so when I was a little kid, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy loves Watership Down too. We love the same things. And I love the Beatles. He integrates the Beatles into lots of his books, which I really appreciate too.
Absolutely, I'm a Beatlemania. But now, first, before we go on, I just want to say, guys, if you're a big Dean Koontz fan, that's just a joke. I have nothing against Dean Koontz. It's really, people are like, why do you hate Dean Koontz? Like, guys, I haven't read Dean Koontz. It's just kind of a joke with Stephen King fans. It's like you trash on Dean Koontz. It's just a joke. So if you're writing angry comments right now, I was just kidding. Calm down. But you
gotta be careful.
Yeah. One thing that you kind of bring up there is, yeah, he's a very courageous writer. He was never afraid to try to push the boundaries on kind of the things. At the time, he was like, okay, look, at this point, anything I put out, people are going to read it, so I might as well take some chances. You know, it's not like it's going to just end my career. Sometimes they work out. Dark Tower worked out. Sometimes they don't. Hey, Tommy Knockers, how you doing? You know, but you know, even then, there are a lot of people who did like the Tommy Knockers, and that just happens. But I do like that he has always been very courageous. He's never been shy to try something new. Like there's a lot of people, that little twist at the end of Later, they didn't like that, and they felt like it ruined the book for them. And I'm like, what you kind of talked about, those things happen, and Stephen King is never afraid to talk about the ugly things that happen in childhood and in your life, and especially with your family. Your family could be the most effed up thing you ever encounter, you know. So I love that he's not scared to do that kind of stuff. Now, that one scene in it, yeah, that's like the one time I'm like, Stephen, maybe you should have laid off the drugs a little bit there. But, you know, again, I do like that he has the courage to try these things and not be scared of it. So I'm glad you bring that up for sure.
I really liked that ending scene in Later, and I just remember writing you a message being like, oh nice, a callback to one of his quotes. Then I turned the page, I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I do like every once in a while he does something like that. I think at 4 Past Midnight, there's kids in the library, and he actually talks about like Stephen King and Dean Koontz books in it, and I thought that was pretty funny. Other people think, oh, there he is, like tooting his own horn again. I'm like, so it's fine. He's allowed. He's earned it.
If anyone can.
The only thing I think that's aged on Buffy is the first season when she says, if the apocalypse comes, beep me. But that's such a great line that I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, I had a beeper. I mean, that was the first show, I think, where I was the age of the characters. So that's why I was able to latch onto it so much. All the other stuff, like little older than you. So when Beverly Hills 90210 came out, I was in junior high, you know, but those were the cool high school kids. So I was never like the same age as them. So yeah, we could actually probably do this about Buffy, but I probably, that's probably not what people want to hear.
I know we have many intersecting interests. As I watch your channel, I'm like, yes, we have a lot of things that we like in common.
All right, well then let's see what this one. If you had to pick, all we hear about is these really bad Stephen King adaptations. There are some really good ones though. There really are. And I think that they are traditionally the ones that stick the closest to the source material, obviously. So you had to pick a favorite film or TV adaptation. You get to watch one for the rest of your days. Which one is it going to be?
So I know we have talked about this personally, but I don't know if for people who are watching, I need to reconcile the fact that I love Stephen King with the fact that I am a huge baby. I get scared so easily. Like reading Later, when I hit the 45% mark, I was in bed and it was dark and I had to get up and turn on the lights because I was like, okay, this is actually really starting to scare me now.
I did my Shining reread a couple years ago, and the room 217 part, I was like, what was that noise? You know, so
what's happening?
I get it.
So Stand By Me would be the one that I would choose to watch because it is not too scary. There are some parts actually that are a little bit tense, but it's not scary. It sticks closely to the source material. And this is something we haven't talked about, but one of the things that I am a sucker for in life and in literature is a sense of nostalgia. I am a sucker for nostalgia. It ropes me in. Since I had kids, it's like 100 times worse because life just hits the fast forward button and everything seems to fly by so quickly. And along with really doing a good job in writing the coming of age story, Stephen King manages to capture that sense of nostalgia so well. And that short story, and then consequently the movie, you get that sense of nostalgia. And I really like that.
No, it's great. I showed that one to my kid for the first time. That's his first introduction. All he knows is that Stephen King is scary stuff. So I was like, I let him start watching the movie before I told him it was in it. He was like, "Does that say written by Stephen King?" I was like, "Yes." You just watched your fifth Stephen King movie. He's like, "I thought all he wrote was scary stuff." I was like, "Well, there was some scary stuff in there, but yeah, that's a movie that it's hard for me to make it through, without the allergies flaring up a little bit." But yeah, I'm a Gen Xer. Nostalgia is our favorite thing in the world. So yeah, I think that's probably why he is a good nostalgia writer, because you can't watch Stand By Me and not just be like, remember all those kids you hung out with, back in the day. You just can't. Pre-internet days, it was like, hey, the sun's up, it's time to get on our bikes and be home before it gets dark outside. That's kind of what it was like. Maybe more my gen than yours, But.
No, so I grew up in a super isolated community, so we didn't get internet or anything for a really long time, and so probably I would have had it a little bit younger if I had been in a bigger center. But we lived like in a town that had less than 500 people, totally off in the middle of nowhere, so we had nothing to do but go outside, read books, and go outside. It's really all you could do with your time.
When's the last time you watched Stand By Me? Have you watched it recently?
I have. I watched it after you covered it on Into the Multiverse when you did the short story collection.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm surprised. It just some of those just age magnificently, and I think Rob Reiner was one of those, along with I think Frank Darabont and now Mike Flanagan, who just seem to be. They get what Stephen King is about. That's why I think that so many people have a hard time adapting these, because one, they think that they're better writers than Stephen King, and they aren't, and they always try to change everything. Like that Pet Sematary remake. Oh my God. One of the most angriest moments I've ever had in a movie theater. It was like everything I had not to scream out loud. But yes, I'm that serious about Stephen King.
I didn't even see it. So
you're lucky. You're lucky. Save those 2 hours of your life. But that, or they just, I don't know. They're scared. They're scared to go all in on them. So, but with those three guys, it seems like they really get, like, for years I said Gerald's Game. There's no way they can adapt Gerald's Game. It just wouldn't make sense on screen. And Mike Flanagan, he nailed it. So if you haven't watched, have you read Gerald's Game yet?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Good.
I'll add that to my. I have a list of things that I want to read next. So the books that I want to read the most, like the ones that are at the top of my list.
That's my next question.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Books that you haven't read yet, but you plan to. Because I already know about this big boy, and I'm excited. Yeah. If I had time, I'd read it along with you, because I love it. I think it's just a brilliant book. I've read it twice. I love it to death. And I love it because you have your younger stuff, and I read it when I was younger, and then you have your adult stuff, and it's just, the book translates amazingly like that. And that's the thing about King, is rereading of stuff, is you read it when you're younger, you have one opinion, you haven't done anything in your life yet. You read it as an adult once you got a family and stuff, and it's completely different. So the man is a wizard that way. But I'm completely cutting you off. I apologize. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it.
I just know that was when you said you were going to be reading soon. So.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say, if I had to, I did count these up because I had answered a question in a previous video about like who's the author you've read the most, and it's definitely Stephen King. I think I've read like 32 of his books maybe, and he's got 78 or something. So
a lot. Yeah, I quit counting a while back, but yeah, a lot.
It's above the 1/3 mark anyway. But I still feel like, and I know the internet's a complicated place to be. I tell my husband all the time, everyone's a Sith on the internet. Like, you're either with someone or you're against someone. Like, there's no gray zone. So I know some people are like, well, you haven't read everything, so how do you even love Stephen King? I do. The things that I have read, I love a lot.
I haven't read everything. His writing. I'd like to hear somebody tell me I'm not a real Stephen King fan. So.
But it is definitely at the top of my list. 11, always forget the sequence. 11, 22, 63 is at the top of my list. Yeah. And so those are the two kind of main ones that I have that are right at the top. The scarier ones I have avoided, like the ones that I have a perception of being scary. So I actually haven't read The Shining, which is funny because like his 3 quintessential books are It, The Stand, and The Shining. So I have read The Stand, which I really, really love, because to me that was more post-apocalyptic and therefore less scary. So The Shining's at the top of the list too.
I would say his scariest book, if it isn't The Shining, it's probably Salem's Lot. So I would say if you nowadays people don't remember that vampires used to be scary. Stephen King will remind you why they used to be scary. So I think he said he thinks that's his most scary book. So yeah, and same with Pet Sematary. If you haven't read that, as a parent, that'll really, really mess you up now.
I have read Pet Sematary. So Pet Sematary I had avoided for a long time. I read it last year.
Oh.
And it ended up being really sad timing, and I think like has managed to mess me up forever, because as I was reading it, unfortunately my cousin who I was really, really close to passed away, and he was very young, and it was unexpected. And so I was reading Pet Sematary and then had this like personal tragedy, and I was like is the universe conspiring to just ruin everything right now
with that at the time? Yeah, so
yeah, it was.
As a parent, that's a very, very tough read.
It is a tough read, but it was fantastic. I loved it. I don't think I'll ever reread it because A, I think it'll bring back bad memories of the time that I read it, and B, it freaked the shit out of me. Like
you say that it permanently scars you. Yes, Stephen King does tend to do that with a lot of people, permanently scar them. So starting at 12, though, I think that you had a good head start, because I think about let's just say that abortion scene in the first Dark Tower book, and I'm like, how did you process this at that age?
I know, right? And it's really strange. So my parents were not strict. So they were very strict about certain things. Like there was definitely music I wasn't allowed to listen to and shows I wasn't allowed to watch on TV. But I think they felt that if it was a book, it was improving your mind. And so you could read it as long as one of them had read it. It was usually my dad. My mom likes romance, which wasn't what I ended up liking at all. And my dad likes fantasy, so that's the direction that I went. But as long as he had read it before, he would, like I said, read it at the same time. And I don't remember that scene scarring me in any way. I read it now more as an adult, and I also think like, what the heck?
Or that one in Wastelands with Susanna and the demons, like what?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can't imagine reading that at that age. But hey, that is serious dad goals right there. I can't get my kid to read anything, you know. I would love to do these kind of things. I'm reading Harry Potter to him at night, and I'm starting to be like, you know what, you're getting to the point where you can start reading this stuff on your own. I would like you to start reading this stuff on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's got that option of an iPad or Netflix, he's not picking up a book, and I feel like that's a bad.
And you reading to him. My kids would take me reading to them over reading themselves any day. Like once you start that, which is a good thing, you know, they want to have that bonding time.
I can tell that they'll probably end up being these people who only listen to audiobooks now. They'll end up being like one of that, because they're used to people reading the book to them, I guess. But yeah, no, that's an awesome relationship with your dad. I think that's just so cool. I hope to be that cool of a dad eventually. You know, I'll get there.
You'll get there.
So I don't have anything else really, but anything else that you want to talk about? Hey, this is a palaver. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. What are you most excited for about the future with Stephen King? I mean, obviously Billy Summers comes out in a month here. I don't know if you're planning to read that when it comes out, or if you're just like, I got too much other Stephen King stuff to read right now. I don't have any idea. What's your plans with King in the future here?
I do. So what I have been referring to all these books as all year is my neglected King. So I try to take like 1 or 2 of his books a month and read them so that I can catch up. And part of me really wants to catch up quickly. And the other part is thinking, like, how long is this sustainable? Like, how long is he going to keep putting out these books? And then how many will I have left over to tide me over when I'm sad that no more are coming? But I definitely want to prioritize those ones that I talked about, the ones that I feel like I really need to read. And I also am really invested in rereading these Dark Tower books now. Like discussing them with Philip and you and Chaz was awesome. And I have read them enough that I have opinions on all of them. And I remember the main arcs of all the books. And I remember what I liked and what I disliked about each one. But I really want to go back in for all those details. So I'm going to continue rereading the Dark Tower books for sure.
So you said that your dad kind of was on there was 2 camps when Dark Tower 7 came out. There were people who absolutely thought it was brilliant, and there were people who could not stand it. And here's the thing that I get usually is, you'll know what I'm talking about since you finished it. It wasn't so much as the ending. It was some of the more meta moments that he wrote in the book that really just took me out of it. And I thought it was it just felt like he was taking so long to write this. And then he just wanted to be done with it because he was, he got spooked after his accident, thought he was going to die. So he wanted to finish it. He wanted Robert Jordan it, as he put it. He wanted to actually, get it done. So I think that kind of played into it a little bit. But here's the thing. A lot of people were mad when that series ended. A lot of people who had been waiting, 30 years for the series to be complete. And they were mad about it. And I think over time, it's kind of calmed down and more people have kind of went back to it and been like, hey, you know what? It's actually kind of brilliant, this and this and this. It was never the actual ending. But you did say that your dad was in the camp that I was, where he basically had a breakup with Stephen King. You didn't talk to him for a while after he finished that series, correct?
Yeah, he's still mad. I don't think he's ever going to come around. I think he's of the age now that like once he forms an opinion, it is there, even if I'm the person who tries to argue him out of his opinions most of the time. He is still really pissed about the ending. I had to convince him to even read The Wind Through the Keyhole. He wouldn't even buy a copy. I don't think he has a copy.
I still haven't done it because I am that. I'm like, I've forgiven him, but I haven't forgiven the point where I'm reading any more Dark Tower stuff right now. Yeah.
So I think I did force him to read. I was like, you have to read it so that we could talk about it. Like, stop.
Well, then I got a question for you. When I'm doing my reread right now, just finished Wastelands. Do you recommend I do Wind Through the Keyhole after I do Wizard and Glass, or should I read it at the very end?
That's what I'm going to do this time. So I read it afterwards when it came out. But when I do my read through this time, I am going to put it in there in chronological order. So I'm going to go in and do it after Wizard and Glass because I think it adds a richness to the story that we've been given in Wizard and Glass and helps appreciate some of those things a little bit more. And I think just given how things end with book 7, it's nice to get the story that we get in Wind Through the Keyhole after Wizard and Glass. So I think when I read it going forward, I will do them chronologically. Because
I know I'm going to get the question from people that are doing the first read if they should do that. So I figure on my reread I should do this and be able to tell them, yeah, you should, or no, you should wait till because I don't know if it gives away anything in 5, 6, or 7 in it because when it was released, but I don't know.
It does not. No.
I remember when that was coming out, I was like, how about you just make book 6 and 7 non-canon. You just rewrite them. How about that? I didn't speak to him for about a good 6, 7 years there, as I put it. And like, I stopped caring. I didn't go back to any of his old books. I never got rid of my hardcovers because I ain't crazy, but I was just the point was like, I'm not doing it right now. And I'm really, really, really big into the JFK assassination. So when 11/22/63 came, I was like, all right, well, I got to give it a try. And it was just wonderful. It was an absolutely wonderful book. It was King writing the great American novel, basically, because it was a romance story in the end. It was like, wow, I did not think that this was in his wheelhouse. And that's when I was like, okay, I'll forgive him. And I went back slowly. Like I read Revival this year. I just read Lisi's story. I went back and I read Doom McKee, all that stuff during that breakup period. And it was a painful reconciliation, but it did happen. But on this reread, I am going to be nervous when I get to Dark Tower 6 and 7, knowing about how I feel about it. And I'm wondering if it will be any different for me this year, because a lot of people have said, they were mad about it when it happened, and they did a reread, and they accepted a little more this time. They just felt like it was maybe the weight, but I don't know. I'm still mad about the same thing. So I'm not quite to the point where your dad is. I always give people a second chance, But I was very angry for a long time. I remember when I finished that for like a week, I was just like out of it. My wife was like, we were just dating at the time. She's like, are you okay? Are you okay? Is something wrong? Are we okay? I'm just pissed about the ending of Dark Tower. She's like, oh God, I thought it was something serious. Like, it is something serious.
It is. That was the only time I ever wrote a letter to an author was at the end of the Dark Tower. I loved it so much, and my dad hated it so much. It was such a like we were on opposite sides. We probably had an argument about it, and it blew me away. I loved it, and I have a lot of thoughts because I think people, like you said, don't mind the ending, but then some of the sequence leading up to the ending, they have a lot of problems with. So I really hope that we get to go back to discuss it on Philip's channel, because I have a lot of thoughts about all the things that happen. Though I will admit, Song of Susanna is my least favorite, like it is for so many people, because it feels a bit like filler. Like you get the Wolves of the Kala, and then you're waiting for the Dark Tower, and Song of Susanna didn't give me everything that I wanted as a bridge between those two books. but it's the only signed copy that I have, so
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to just deal
if
with
it
it.
hadn't come out 6 months apart from one another, I would have been really pissed if we'd been
Hmm.
waiting a long time and gotten Song of Susanna for sure. Definitely the low point. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was so different back then. I'm hoping reading at this age, maybe I'll look at things differently. But here's a fun non-Stephen King question for you. If you have a favorite non-Stephen King book, what is it? I'm just curious.
Like what do you mean?
Favorite
Just my
non-Stephen King book? Like, yeah, your favorite book ever that isn't written.
favorite book ever that's not Stephen King? Um,
Gotta try to throw you a curveball here.
no. I have a lot of favorite books. Watership Down is one of my longtime favorites. So, like, if we're talking childhood nostalgic favorite, Watership Down is one of my favorite standalone fantasy books ever. If we take The Lord of the Rings as a complete book instead of a trilogy,
Right.
that is the only series that I'll ever put above The Dark Tower. And just because it was so foundational in terms of my love of fantasy, because I read it before I read Dark Tower. It's really funny growing up. Well, first of all, and Stephen King captures this well as well. Like, kids are inherently narcissistic. Like, they think about themselves. They think that they exist in a universe alone and that no one else experiences the things that they experience and that things belong to them. So I had this really strong sense for both Dark Tower and especially for Lord of the Rings that it belonged to me. Like, there were no other 10-year-olds in the world who loved the Lord of the Rings. It was mine. And the Lord of the Rings is my dad's favorite book series of all time, and he knows them so well. He knows things about the Tolkien legendarium that I would never know, that I'll never remember, because he's just read them all so many times and he's read everything. So it was a big part of that relationship too. And being close with my dad is part of what brought me into fantasy. So it means a lot to me for that reason too. And it also just influenced so much of what was to come. Like, so many of the things that I love now exist because Tolkien did what he did. So it's hard to not appreciate that for that reason. Non-fantasy, one of my favorite books of all time is The Sun Also Rises. Sorry, I was blanking on the name. I could only think of The Old Man and the Sea.
Happens to me
The
all the
Sun
time.
Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. So that's also one of my all-time favorite books. But I have a huge list, as we all do. I have so many favorites.
So I'm glad to hear you list a classic on there, because I feel like so many modern readers, especially booktubers, are just like, when it comes to the classics, they're not really interested at all. And I was like, look, there's some that I don't like. Like, I think Catcher in the Rye is terrible, but there's a lot of the traditional classics that I absolutely love. So I like to talk about those occasionally on the channel. It's just, fantasy is the only thing that really moves the needle around here, as we've seen with Stephen King. But hey, that's cool. That's cool. If I'm going to get people on Stephen King, if I've got to be Jack Torrance and get the axe and chase him there myself, I'm going to do that. So when I find someone who seems to like King as much as I do, I want to talk to him. But hey, when it comes to like booktubing, what made you decide to go ahead and do this?
So when I first discovered BookTube, I was studying for my Royal College exam. So after you go through medical school, you do a residency period, and that's differing amounts of time depending on what your specialty is. So I studied psychiatry, which is a 5-year residency period. Then at the end of that 5 years, you have to write this giant exam. Basically, the 5th year of your residency is devoted to this exam. And it's nonsensical. It costs like $10,000 to do it. You're like flying all over the country. COVID had started when I was studying for mine, so we didn't know if it was going to be postponed. We didn't know if it was going to go ahead, what was going to happen. It was hands down the most stressful time of my entire life.
Sure.
And I didn't have a lot of time to read new things. So I spent a fair chunk of time rereading things and not wanting to get into anything long. And so during those like 10-minute study periods, there's this method of studying that a lot of people use called the Pomodoro method, where you study. So you set a timer for yourself. So you do like whatever your best focus zone is. So say you're like, that you can really keep your attention for 30 minutes. So you say, okay, I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes. I'm only going to study for this 30 minutes. And then I get a 10-minute break. And so I needed to find something that I could fit into those 10-minute slots. And I discovered BookTube. I think that I had read a book that I really wanted to talk to somebody about, and I couldn't find anyone to talk about it with. And so I think I just put it in on YouTube and saw that people actually made these channels to talk about books. And I was like, oh, wow, this is
when
excellent.
I found it too. Yeah. I was like, these are my people. I had no idea this was a thing.
So I had no clue. And so I found out that, and then I did a little bit of searching, and one of the first things that I searched for was Stephen King content. So that is how I happened upon your channel. So yours was one of the very first that I found when I was on that kind of initial BookTube journey. And it just became a really nice way to break up that studying. So I would spend like my time studying, then I'd watch a BookTube video, then I'd go back to studying, and it made like a really good study break. And so once I had been watching it, I was really, really interested in it. And then once I finished my exam and went out to work, I had to move out of the city that I was living in. And I moved to a place where I didn't know anybody. So I didn't really have any friends around. I had a lot of friends elsewhere. And with COVID, it was really hard to get involved in sports or clubs or anything else. So I thought, what can I do with my time? And after spending 4 and then 4 and then 5, so like, 11 years or whatever in school, you kind of feel antsy if you don't have anything to do. So I was like, what can I do that will make me feel like I'm being fulfilled and also enjoying myself? And I decided I could do this. I could talk about some books. And so I did. And it's been really fun. I have been really, really lucky between Philip and Patrick and yourself. Like, people have been very generous in inviting me to come and talk and boosting the channel. Like, it's been a very, very pleasant experience, and everybody seems to be nice. I was a little bit nervous because the internet is not always a kind place to be.
Similar story, yeah.
But BookTube has been great. And one thing that the kind of work that I have done prepares you for is having people not be happy with you sometimes. So I feel like I have a lot of experience with that. So even if things come up, I kind of just let it pass me by. There's a lot of big problems in the world. Yelling at someone about a BookTube video is definitely not the worst thing that could be happening to you.
Yeah, I constantly tell people like 99% of the stuff I get is just like overwhelmingly positive. It's super nice. It's just some of the nicest things that people ever said. But that 1% is definitely some of the nastiest things I've ever heard. And I'm like, is you really this emotional about a book? Wow, okay. All right, well, yeah, similar story. Went back to school at 38 years old, left the workforce and did that full time. So I was stay-at-home dad and did school online. So yeah, kind of the same thing. I was like, I need something to, talk to adults, that's why I decided to just do this. And hey, it's worked out, for the most part. And now I'm back at work and doing this. So it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm excited about it. It's great. And I saw you just hit 1,000 subs. So that's awesome. Whole new world opened up to you now. You might, get you a few bucks a month and get you go buy you some books. It's great. It's great.
There we go. Fun the habit.
Yeah. So what is next for you? What video are you making next? Have you decided yet? You have a schedule?
So I
actually make a schedule of videos you're going to make.
I don't do a schedule, so I have a hard time sometimes sticking to schedules. I really admire your TBR, by the way. I have a really hard time doing that. Things just come and I want to do them, and then I push other things off. So I find it really hard to stick to that. But I am a big planner, and I love making lists and organizing things. So before I ever made a BookTube channel, and I think this is what has been helpful in terms of trying to work, and I usually do like 8 days on call. So that's like 24 hours in a row on call where you can't really do anything else. And then kids. So I have a lot of things to do and a specific amount of time to get it done. So planning is important. So before I ever made the BookTube channel, I had a list, like a big page of things that I thought that I would like to talk about. And there are some things that I would really like to do, some kind of series, I guess you'd call it, to cover on the channel. And one of those is looking at the books that influenced the authors that I like the most. So Stephen King is one of those authors, Neil Gaiman, John Gwynne. Because I have read fairly extensively in classic fantasy and not as much in modern fantasy, I've read a lot of these books that the other authors talk about being the ones that have inspired them. So I like to look at those. And for Stephen King, it's really fun. And I can really only do this for authors that I feel like I understand really well or I've read really widely. But it's really interesting to hear about the books that they really loved and then look at what has inspired them from those works, like what they have brought forward. Like for Stephen King, some of the books that I have read or some of the books that I'm thinking of talking about are things like The Lord of the Flies or Blood Meridian or Watership Down is one of the ones that he has referenced as one of the books that he has loved. So some of those books where you can kind of pick them apart and look at and see I can tell how reading this, like either as a kid or as an up and coming author, has influenced him in the following ways. And I'm trying to figure out a way to organize that well and to make it as interesting for people to watch as it is for me to think about. Because that's part of the translation, right? Is trying to figure out a way to communicate it in a way that people are actually going to want to listen to what you're saying. Because I really love Stephen King, but I have to make other people want to care about why he does the things that he does in order for them to watch like a 15 or 20-minute video. And I talk too much, so my videos are always too long.
Oh,
I don't know how people make these 12-minute videos.
we're definitely on the same page there all the time. Like, your videos don't have to be 20 minutes. Like, yeah, they probably do. That's actually me cutting it down, guys. It's like I can talk about this coffee mug for 20 minutes. It isn't really a problem for me, but no, that sounds great. Like I said, anytime you can go back to what the influences are, because like, for example, when I talked to John Gwynn on the channel and he talked so much about Bernard Cornwell, that's the whole reason I want to read Warlord Chronicles, was just hearing about how much he liked it. And then another thing you're going to learn about BookTube is you'll get a lot of recommendations. So
Yes.
my list, like I was never going to read Malazan probably if I didn't do this. I was never going to probably. A lot of stuff that's kind of coming up there, but then you get like all the people like, hey, you like this author, check this out. Like, you like John Gwynn, you got to read David Gemmell because it's very similar. That's going to happen to you a lot. So I admire that you have a flexible TBR. I worked in risk analysis for years, so we plan about 12 to 15 months in advance for everything. So I have to do that with this. But I'm watching so many read-alongs right now that it feels like, okay, my schedule's pretty much set. I can just fit one or two things per month in there, and then going through the multiverse thing right now, which I'm on my first break since I started doing this. I'm going to take a little break before I get to needful things, but that's one I'm very much looking forward to revisiting. So any of these that you haven't done and you want to read at the same time, you know how to find me. But guys, you can find her at Sarah Reads on YouTube. Is there anywhere else people can find you, any socials or anything like that?
I do. I have like I made an Instagram, which is called Darth Obs, and I don't post on it very often. So if you're looking for a lot of updates, it's not really going to be there. But I do link it in all of my videos. Twitter is not for me. It is not the place that I would like to spend my time on the internet. But no, it's mostly just on BookTube. I hang out on Discord, like I hang out in your Discord. So feel free if you have a question ever to ask it. I don't mind at all. I really like talking to people, but I find jumping into group conversations to be the one thing that makes me nervous. So I have no trouble. They make you record yourself a lot in medical school to learn how to interview properly and how to engage a patient. So I've spent a lot of years of my life watching back videos of myself. So I don't have any trouble with that. One-on-one, great. But I have always found it difficult to jump into a group of people, especially when they're so well established. Like in your Discord, everybody seems like they're really good friends. Yeah. And I know they would be super nice if I jumped into the conversation, but I find it really difficult.
We'll get you to pop out of your shell. We got to warn you, though, it's addictive, and it'll make you stop reading as much as you probably want to do. So, Twitter was way too negative for me. So with it, basically Discord was like a replacement for that for me. And yeah, it's just such a super positive community. So yeah, everybody there is like friends, and it's great, because for the longest time I had no one to talk to about these books that I like to read, because no one I knew. Maybe some people would read some Stephen King or something, but anything else, like I knew no fantasy readers. I mean, I had to twist people's arms to go see Lord of the Rings with me when it came out and stuff like that. I had to beg them to give Game of Thrones a try when it was coming out on HBO because I didn't want it to get canceled, And people forget that show was not super popular when it started, by the way. But yeah, so it's always been a good outlet, and that's what I like about BookTube, getting to talk to other people who have similar interests and likes, and getting to know those people. And I'm starting to think that me and your dad were separated at birth, because it sounds like he's into the same things that I'm into, and obviously he's done a great job at passing that down. Well, thank you very much, like I said, for being my guinea pig to kind of see how this series is going to go. I don't really know how much I'm going to change, but I don't really feel like Stephen King fans have a hard time talking to each other. So I don't really know if there needs to be a format or anything about this. And I'm pretty sure we probably talk like a lot longer, but we'll probably do that after we end this video here, because we want to talk about spoilers, like how ridiculous the stuff that happens in book 6 of Dark Tower is. Yes. So you want to talk about these things, and I want to talk about why she loves them. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a blast. I can't wait to do it again in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. See ya.